So welcome everybody to this Kriya Yoga online Q&A session for the Astrological Apprenticeship course. And today's group, I did send out the invitation to both years, the year 1 and year 2 classes. So we'll see who all shows up, but this is going to be a Q&A for both the year 1 and year 2 courses. I do have some questions, and one particular announcement to make. So if you don't already know, on March 27th, last Wednesday, I believe, Mr. Davis passed. So I found out about that on Friday. I had just written him an email on Wednesday, and usually he's pretty quick with his responses to emails. And I hadn't heard anything from him, so I had been away because I had gone to Nevada to celebrate Melissa's birthday with her brother. And as I got up on Friday morning to check email to see what was going on, I also happened to pop onto Facebook and saw an announcement from a CSA minister that is a friend of mine from Chile, Chris Sartain. And so I immediately called him, and he told me that all he knew at the moment was that Mr. Davis had been getting weaker over the last 6 weeks, and then on Wednesday was very weak and was taken to the hospital, and then was diagnosed with renal failure and then heart failure, and I believe he passed that evening. But what was interesting about all that, if that's not interesting enough, was on Wednesday I had sent him an email because I'd done lots of research into things like near-death experiences and contemplated meditated on death and so on. And the last time I saw him was about 4 weeks ago. Actually, it was almost exactly 4 weeks ago, because I was down at CSA for about 4 days, and we met and talked for about 2 hours, and then he invited me to have lunch down at the main office with the staff. And we sat and talked for another hour or so over lunch. And a comment had come up about a CSA, another CSA member who had passed on in his 60s. And after taking care of Melissa for 1.5 years through leukemia treatments, the way they described this member passing, I said, well, that sounds like a good way to go. And there was a debate about good ways to go. But I just sent Mr. Davis an email on Wednesday, the day he passed, basically saying, it was rather long and had some personal information in it, but basically the gist of it was, I said, this is what I want to know. I said, you've been around for a while. You're 88 years old. You've seen people pass, and I'm sure you've meditated and contemplated on this. So what are your actual thoughts or experiences or ideas or understandings on death and what happens and these sorts of things? And that was the last email that I sent. I never got a response to it. And then I found out on Friday that I guess he knows now, but as with all ironic things, still can't tell me. So not to make light of the situation, but if this wasn't the first time you've heard of this, then I apologize. But part of what I realized after sitting with that for a little bit, for a few days, is that now this is, in a sense, up to us. You know, my book Continuing the Lineage of Enlightenment, Kriya Yoga, Continuing the Lineage of Enlightenment. And if you read that book, or if you're aware of that book, the reason I chose that name, the reason that title came to me was because when I was working on the sutras commentary that's in that book, the Yoga Sutras commentary in that book, it occurred to me that we have this idea of a lineage, a spiritual lineage, and this idea of continuing this lineage, moving on from, say, Babaji to Lahiri Mahasaya to Swami Sri Yukteswar to Paramahansa Yogananda to Roy Eugene Davis and Roy Eugene Davis's students, or his successors, as he would often say. But really, the lineage of enlightenment continues through each of us. So it's not a particular person or figurehead or public figure that has the role or title of teacher, because you could not have those roles or those titles if there were not individuals participating in the experience of learning and growing together. And that's essentially what we're doing. So time moves on, bodies wear out, consciousness persists, and just like from Lahiri Mahasaya's time to Sri Yukteswar's to Yogananda's to Roy Davis's and so on, there's been this continued connection, this continued life, this continued breath of spiritual exploration that has persisted through time. And that has persisted through time by individuals like you and me, seeking out knowledge, practicing meditation, aiming to clarify our consciousness, not only for our own sake, but for the sake of life itself. So when things like this happen, it tends to depend on how close to home it hits for you, I suppose. It tends to clear away some of the debris about what is and what is not important in life. And what I'd like to encourage you to think about and understand is that now, while Mr. Davis is no longer in a body or in a physical form, that light, that essence, that energy, that quality, that consciousness is ever present. And as I discussed in the book, Continuing the Lineage of Enlightenment, and as we've discussed in many talks together, is that light, that quality, that clarity that you recognize in a spiritual teacher, that you recognize in someone that you learn from, that you experience when you're in their presence, that is also a part of you. It's inside you. That's why you're able to recognize it. So by continuing this lineage of enlightenment, essentially what we're doing is we're honoring and we're acknowledging this same essence, this same spirit, this same supreme consciousness throughout the Guru lineage, but also as though it's within us, as though it's within our own heart, within our own life, and within our own being. And that's how we continue this lineage of enlightenment, because we're all going to grow old. We're all going to leave this body at some point in time. But by your life, by your practice, by your example, even if you never teach anyone meditation, even if you never talk about meditation with another person, the quality of your life, the quality of your consciousness impacts everyone else around you. And so we're all uplifted by the clarity that we seek to embody, or the clarity that we seek to allow to flow through us. I met Mr. Davis 20 years ago, almost 20 years ago, coming up in August, I believe. And we remained in touch very closely that whole time. I would say he was one of the top 2 most influential people in my life after becoming an adult. And I learned a lot through simply sitting and listening to him talk, because whenever we would get together, there was very rarely a question and answer phase where I had things in mind that I was curious about. Usually I would show up to CSA, whether it was for a retreat, or most often after the first 10 years, it would be a private retreat where I would go, and there would be no one else there, maybe one or two other people on the grounds, and then we'd go to the chalet, the little A-frame on the CSA grounds, which was Mr. Davis's office. And we would just sit in the living room on the couch. I'd be on the couch, he'd be on the chair, and you can see that. You can see where that was. There's, I think, at least one video on this channel, youtube.com/, or I'm not doing a YouTube video, but I'm going to post this on YouTube, on youtube.com/Kriya Yoga Online, where I did a question and answer phase with Mr. Davis. I think there were 2 of them. So you can see where those interactions occurred, but mainly it was just sitting there for 2 or 3 hours, and Mr. Davis would share stories, and I would listen. Every now and then I'd make a comment, but most of the time I was quiet. We'd drink tea, and then sometimes after that he would invite me down to the main office, where I'd have lunch with staff there, Kathleen and Ron, and his wife Willie, whoever else might be around at the time. And that went on for quite a while. Or, when Melissa and I would go visit together, the upper house, there's a greenhouse up there, which maybe some of you are familiar with. It's the upper part of the grounds. He would come up there, and we'd sit in the main room, and I'd pull one of the recliners to get over, and we just sit around in that living room space and just talk for a couple hours. So, he has been a very influential and important part of my life, of my adult life. And the basics of Kriya Yoga, the basics of meditation, the basics of what it means to live a good, wholesome, and spiritual life. These were things that I learned from him. Things that you can learn from his books, things that you can learn from his talks, videos that are on the CSA YouTube channel, or if you go to csa-davis.org, there are little DVDs that you can buy of him talking. One in particular that was very good is the Kriya Yoga Congress. I think they might still have that on DVD. The very first Kriya Yoga Congress. He teaches the Kriya initiation techniques, discusses how to practice. But when it comes down to it, all of it is extremely simple. And that is the main point to always, always remember. I know what it's like to want to overcomplicate things personally. I understand that. And since I've moved back to West Virginia, I actually have found, I've been attending a meditation group just to support the group. And I'm friends with a few of the individuals who started it, very good friends of mine. But the questions that are often asked in this group are overcomplicating the issue often. And even when it comes to the Kriya Yoga apprenticeship course, sometimes the questions that are asked are overcomplicating the issue. But again, that's because most of the time we are caught up in our mind. We are caught up in our overthinking, overanalyzing, rather than the being, the pure existence being. So as you continue your own Kriya Yoga practice in this way, you need to keep it simple. When it comes to thinking about this idea of the lineage of enlightenment and lineage of teachers, and Mr. Davis was the last living student of Paramahansa Yogananda. He was the last living student of Paramahansa Yogananda. But even when he would do meditations, when he would go through the process of honoring the lineage of teachers, he would go through their names, and then he would all end with, and their successors, because that is how this is transmitted from one person to another. And it's not solely the right or the content of an organization. It is are the individuals, are the students learning and clarifying their awareness, and are they sharing that in the world through their life? So you want to keep it simple. You don't want to overcomplicate it. And this is going to be a very strong emphasis that I'm going to be placing on teaching from this point forward. I've tried many times to do it, and I think I have. But again, when situations like this arise, losing someone that is very dear to you, it tends to make you see the importance of the time that you do have and not wasting time. And that was one thing I did appreciate with Mr. Davis. He never wasted time on things that didn't need to be wasted time on. If I did bring up a question, or if I did have an issue or something I was wondering about, and it was irrelevant, he would ignore it. He would maybe say one word or two about it and then just move on. And at first that was very hard for me in the beginning, being a thinker, again, an overanalyzer. But as time went on, I began to very much appreciate that. And so from this point forward, since we do not know how much time we have, I will be putting emphasis on, even more so, those specific, simple techniques, those specific, simple lifestyle guidelines that allow you to clarify your mind, body, spirit, heart, consciousness as quickly as possible. That's going to be the focus. And I'd like to encourage you to approach your own life in that way, with simplicity, with directness, with the idea of brahmacharya, of conserving your vital resources, including time, and not wasting time on things which are no longer important. As I mentioned, I had met with Mr. Davis just about 4 weeks ago, and I hadn't really done the math right in regards to his age. I knew his birthday was coming up, so I said, "Oh, you're going to be 90 now?" I guess I'd just simply forgotten the year he was born. And he looked at me and he said, "Don't rush me." He says, "I'm going to be 88." He says, "I've still got some time to go." So, and even in situations like that, he had just started on YouTube a year-long Kriya Yoga course, the first of which I did post on my Facebook page, the fictional character Ryan Kurzak Facebook page. But someone doesn't start a project like that unless they're planning on being around for a while. And in my life experience, having experienced a good deal of separation, loss, and death in a very short amount of time, I can assure you that certain things are mysteries. And the timing of life and our lives, the beginning and ending of them, these are also mysteries that are beyond the mind. And so in a way, going back to the email that I sent Mr. Davis, the fact that he didn't respond, of course he had a good reason not to. In a way, it was almost like the same kind of response I would get if I would ask another question that was something that my mind didn't need to dwell upon. So for now, I'll go ahead and conclude this portion of the Q&A, this announcement. I'm sure in time, the more I think about it, maybe we'll share some more stories. One of the last time I saw Mr. Davis, and during lunch, the topic of that Mr. Rogers documentary came up, and someone had talked about, I guess, a biography or autobiography that another person had written called Mr. Rogers and Me, Mr. Rogers and Me. And I just looked over around Mr. Davis, and I saw in one of the boxes in the warehouse, because that's where they eat lunch, Paramahansa Yogananda as I Knew Him, his book Paramahansa Yogananda as I Knew Him. And so I made a joke and I said, well, maybe I should start writing the book Mr. Davis and Me, Mr. Davis and Me. But that'll take some time. So we'll go ahead and we'll conclude this portion of the Q&A now, this announcement portion, and then we'll go ahead and move on with the questions that we have. Okay, so I do have a list of questions via email, which I will be answering. But before I do that, I just want to check in and see if there are any other questions. Anything that's come up since we've this morning or before you were able to send the email. If there are questions, type in yes, and then I'll wait to hear your question. If there are no questions, then type no, and then I'll know to move on. Okay, so far, no, there's been one question, so I'll wait on that question to pop up. As far as CSA goes right now, from what I've been told, they're continuing their retreats as usual, and that seems appropriate. That is something that Mr. Davis, I believe, would want. So this year, and I'm sure future years, retreats will continue as they have, figuring out how to fill in that void of Mr. Davis's physical presence. I don't know how that's going to play out at the moment. Okay, so here's a question. Okay. So this is related to the Bhagavad Gita and the chapter on the yoga of action. So it describes a devotee who should have mental capacity to control the senses. And the question is, what type of senses? Happiness, anger, fear. And most importantly, what does it mean to develop a capacity to control these senses? Cultivate the same attitude, even-mindedness for both good and bad. Practice indifference or absence of feelings. Okay, well, the idea of controlling the senses, control of the senses means for example, some people are addicted to Facebook. They cannot control that sense, that sensory stimulation of having to scroll through and see everyone's irrelevant stories and all the stupid memes. So by controlling the senses, this is simply controlling the attachment to the addiction of the senses in a way. Or, for example, someone who is who eats too much, or eats wrong food, or eats bad food, or food that is not healthy for them. Well, you need to control the sense of taste. And so it's about learning to turn your attention away from the fulfillment of these things, like sense experience, essentially. Also, it can relate to the idea of learning to internalize your attention. One of the reasons that people meditate so poorly is that they are addicted to all the noises that they hear, or they're addicted to music, or they're addicted to visual distractions. And so part of controlling the senses is learning to withdraw your awareness from the sense of sound, from the distraction of your eyes fluttering, from the smells within the room, from the senses that you feel on your skin, and pull your awareness within. So control of the senses is that. Learning to realize that you are not the body. That's one of the key things there. This is why many meditation teachers say that the issue isn't necessarily a lack of enlightenment. It's confusing what you really are, this eternal, timeless being, which is working through this body. Somehow forgetfulness arises, and then you start thinking, oh, well, I am this body. So when the body gets old or ill or dies, people get anxious and freak out. When really that's just a natural, that's just like when you watch nature and you see a rose grow from a seed, make the bloom, and then wither and then fall away. The rose is not worried about the process. The rose is going through the process. And when a human is able to not be addicted to their senses or not be attached to the false small sense of self, this is in a way where this idea of bliss or peace comes in, because you see things as they are. And the idea of even-mindedness to both good and bad, this is not indifference or absence of feeling, it's even-mindedness. It's not getting caught up in the moment such that you forget, again, your timeless essence. An individual who is awake and clear, if it is appropriate in their life to be angry about something, they can express that. They can let it pass through them. Again, the problem is when an individual gets angry about something and then clamps down on it and won't let it go, and it festers, and it becomes, they identify with it, they claim it as their own, they define themselves through it. Sadness is a natural expression in life. When you find out that something difficult has happened, there's a reason that our bodies have the reaction of sobbing, of tears, because it is a natural reaction. It helps energy to move. It helps life to continue to move. For example, over this weekend as I've been thinking about contemplating life and death, again, that's been something very persistent in my life for the last few years. I realized that the idea of birth and death is like the breath of life. Birth and death, it's like the breath of life, or the breath of being. And so it's a natural thing. So it's not indifference. And it takes practice to be able to be natural in a state of happiness, and natural in a state of anger, and natural in a state of sadness, and natural in a state of neutrality without attaching to it. That's really what we're working here. So you don't become a blank, mindless, unfeeling automaton. You become natural. That's why I like Vasista's yoga and the statement that all this is about learning to live a natural and spontaneous life contentedly. But the way that you develop this, you cultivate this, is by watching, by observing, by asking, am I, who or what am I that experiences this? And then when sadness arises, you are aware of the body as it goes through a process of sadness. But you are not that sadness, and you know that you are not that body. Again, in the same way that an actor or actress, when they are playing their role, they know what they're doing, and they have to get into it, they have to do it. But then when it passes, they don't go around the rest of the day or the year continuing to act like the person they were pretending to be for the sake of the entertainment. So this is the first step in this, related to this question, is, again, learning to practice meditation such that you pull your awareness within, such that you can sit still, make yourself be quiet, and eventually ignore the fluttering eyes or the light that's going through the room. Learn to ignore the sounds that drive you crazy, because people should just be quiet when you're trying to meditate. Learn to ignore the temperature changes and pull your awareness within, focus your awareness within, on the breath, on the being, on the witness of those things. And then the more you do that in this intensive exercise of meditation, then when you're out and about in the world, when something comes up and a thought, a memory, an emotion passes through you, there's a little part of you that recognizes, I am the observer of this. This rises and this falls, this comes and this goes. And then you naturally develop this state of what you consider to be even-mindedness or equanimity. For example, about 2 months ago, when I found out that my house was pushed off the hill by a busted water main and everything was destroyed and it was a total loss, the insurance adjuster who worked with me, I saw his email was his name and then 108, like the number of mala beads and that sacred number 108. And I thought, well, that's interesting. I didn't bring it up though. But then probably about 6 weeks later, he had called me and mentioned that he said it looked like things were going well, looked like it might work out to be covered. And I said, well, you know, at this point, I'm just going to be even-minded. And then he quoted, he said, yes, having equanimity in all circumstances. He quoted something verbatim from some spiritual text that I had known. I had to chuckle. So I asked him, I said, what, does that 108 at the end of your email, does it mean what I think it means? He said, yeah, 108 ways to transcendence. And then he laughed and he said, I think you having your house destroyed was 109. But anyway, the reason I tell that story is because while the sheer absurdity of life at some points in time, the more you've meditated, the more you realize I'm not my home, I'm not my partner, I'm not my body, I'm not all these things. When you realize that, then when good or bad things arise or fall, you are less destroyed, nor are you less addicted to the need for things to be the way you kind of want them to be all the time. So this was a long way of answering your question, and I hope that it did answer your question. But things like anger and fear and happiness, those are natural responses to just stimulus in life. So it's not that you try to get rid of those things. It's that you recognize what they are. You recognize that they're part of this mind-body personality experience, but in your personal meditation practice in your daily life, you are learning to experience what you are, the eternal timeless self in which all those things rise and fall. Okay, great. So that's the only question that I've gotten from this group at the moment. What I'll do is I'll go to the email questions that were sent to me. There were numerous questions there, but I will check back to the questions on this group chat as we go. Let's start at the right spot here. Okay, so question number 1. And remember that some of these questions are coming from the year 1 students as well as the year 2 students. So if I start talking about something you think, well, we haven't covered that yet, it's probably because you're a year 1 student and this is a year 2 question. Or if I start talking about something and you think, well, gee, didn't we cover that last year about this time? It's because it's probably coming from a year 1 student and you're a year 2 student. So as I understand from the last class in verse 28, is it correct that I should not only listen to the Om vibration, but also contemplate on its meaning? Contemplation on its meaning, yes, it is important to contemplate on the meaning of the Om vibration. But just like anything else, contemplation proceeds not by it can begin with a mental construct. It can begin with a question where you're wondering, well, what does this mean? What is this about? And you think about it, and you go through a process of, in your mind, talking over, okay, well, this is what my experience is. This is what I think this means. So you can begin contemplation in that way. But then eventually there'll come a point where you realize, well, I've asked all the questions, I've thought it through, this is how I understand it. So what you do is then you move beyond that to just simply a state of holding the idea in your mind and watching and waiting. So the Om vibration, whether you're chanting Om or listening to the Om vibration, you hear it or you chant it and you let it simply fill up your awareness. You let everything else fall away except for the experience of Om, whether it's from chanting and internally or externally. And that is the best way in this particular situation to contemplate on its meaning. Because Om itself it comes before ideas and words. So the way you contemplate on its meaning is not through ideas and words. It's through going beyond ideas and words and simply holding in your mind, holding in your consciousness, or holding in your heart even, the vibration of Om, the inner sound of Om, and filling up your awareness with only that. Let everything else fall away. And even if distractions come about, that's okay. That's part of the process. You return it to the sound, or you return it to the inner feeling. And then a time will come when you are simply aware of just that. And then that is when the experience of the knowledge of Om becomes apparent. So follow up to that question from someone on the group chat. As I try to listen to the Om sound, I hear this buzzing sound. This continues even after I finish my meditation session for some time, and also during random times throughout the day when there is silence around. Is it okay to intentionally listen to it then, or just ignore it? Anytime you have an opportunity to turn your attention within and listen to that inner sound current. And again, we've discussed this in this course, we've discussed it in my books, I've discussed it at least in a few videos on youtube.com/Kriya Yoga Online. For those of you who aren't familiar with this just yet, anytime you can take a moment and listen, it will be clarifying, it will be uplifting, it will be freeing for you. So never pass up that opportunity. Sometimes for me, it'll occur at 4 a.m. If I'm not up yet, I'll wake up and I'll hear that sound. I'll know, okay, this is the time to meditate. And so I'll wake up and I'll just simply listen and go as deeply into that sound as possible with meditation. So the next question related to Om. When contemplating Om, it says, usually I contemplate while mentally repeating Om, which then eventually stops and becomes silence, and I listen only to the sound. Is this correct? Yes, that is correct. So I have some difficulty in seeing the difference between truth and what is real and the eternal. Eternal is that which has no beginning nor end, while truth, real, is that which Lord Krishna defines as that which does not exist cannot come into existence, and that which does exist can never cease to exist. That which exists in the beginning, in the middle, and the end. Thus, in my understanding, both mean the same thing. Is that correct? It's kind of a confusing question that you have there. I don't fully understand it. It is difficult to weed through this idea of what is true, what is real, and what is eternal, because in the end we realize it's all one thing. So try to make sense of that. But basically what you can contemplate to help you work this out. And again, this is why Mr. Davis stresses that in order to practice Kriya Yoga, you do have to have a certain level of intelligence. And by intelligence, it doesn't mean like book smart, like you've read a lot of books where you can do some crazy math problems, because I know plenty of extremely intelligent individuals who can't grasp the basic fundamentals of yoga. It's a subtle intelligence. And that subtle intelligence is developed through meditation and observation, the witnessing presence. Because if you've never taken a moment or the time to observe that bodies are born and die, that the things you thought were so important when you were 16 really aren't that important when you're 39, that the emotions that drove you when you were 4 years old barely even move you when you're in your 30s or 60s or 70s, and the dreams that you have that rise and fall, that they come and they go, that is what is defined as the unreal. Not because you can't experience it, but because in a sense it is impermanent. So maybe a better word for unreal would be the impermanent or the temporal nature of things. But the more you see the changes as they rise and as they fall, as loved ones come into your life and go out of your life, as the body gets strong and then gets weak and then gets strong again, as you have wonderful days and then you have bad days, when you have wonderful meditations and then bad meditations, the key is to always focus on, well, who or what is it that is aware of that change? And that is the hard part, because most of us are addicted to the rise and the fall. And so we want to, again, clamp down on, oh, this was a good meditation experience, we've got to get that again. When really that's not the point of meditation. The point of yoga, of realizing the eternal, is to exist, be that witness, beyond the mind, beyond definitions, beyond saying, oh, this is it. or I want to hold on to this. So again, this theme of impermanence, that is natural to existence. The subtle intelligence that is required is to be able to hold, like I've described to other people, hold your mental breath. Just like when you're talking to someone, having a conversation, and you really want to say something. But in order for you to participate well and have the conversation, you have to shut up. You have to be quiet inside and actually hear what the other person is saying. So you have to hold your mental breath so that you can be present for it. The same thing is true when trying to determine the difference between the real and the eternal. You have to learn to hold your mental breath. Stop thinking about it. Observe, watch, be. Don't try to define yourself through experiences or the changing phenomena, or cling to one particular phenomena that you enjoy best. When you develop that kind of subtle intelligence, and it takes time, it takes practice, then you recognize it. It becomes very clear to you. So that is not necessarily an easy idea or concept for people to grasp in the beginning, which is why we tell them, look, just do your Kriya Pranayama, chant your mantras, give your full attention to that. Because in those experiences, eventually they catch a glimpse, because they've let go of everything but that one thing that they're focusing on. They catch a glimpse of it. And once an individual catches a glimpse of it, then we can start to talk about, all right, now you get it a little bit. Let's try to work on cultivating that, which will go beyond these definitions of the mind, these questions in a way. Question number 3. As a householder with family responsibilities, there are preoccupations nearly every day. Therefore, sometimes it can happen that at the beginning of my meditation session, during alternate nostril breathing or Soham mantra, a certain worry comes up in a disturbing manner and lingers there in the background. Is it okay when this happens that I just ignore it and continue to concentrate on what I'm doing, even if I cannot send away this thought 100%? Yes. Remember that as things come up during meditation, there's no problem with that. That's part of the process. Many things can come up. And if you're trying to meditate and something comes up, well, that's just an indication that you're clarifying your awareness. And in time, you learn to not even let it come into your mind. Some people, you can eventually meditate so well that a truck can go by your window and you're so internally absorbed that you don't even know that it happens. If you have these mental distractions and there's something that you think, if they're in the back of your mind because you have to think about them, meaning you're afraid you'll forget about it and it's something you need to take care of that day, there's absolutely nothing wrong with having a little notepad by your meditation chair. And if you just need to write it down so you don't forget, write it down. And then you don't have to think about it at all for the duration of your meditation. And you can get to it when you're done. That's what I do when those things occur. But if it's just simply an obsessive thought that won't go away, nothing you can do about it, then the key is to just return your attention back to the mantra or the pranayama or breath awareness. Okay. Now this is a question. Often the mantra Satchidananda Svarupa Shivoham I found to be used as, looks like she just read the same thing, Satchidananda Rupa, oh, I see, Satchidananda Rupa Shivoham. In my understanding, they're not the same because Svarupa means nature and Rupa means form. Therefore, I don't think that they should be used interchangeably, which is the correct one. I don't know. I don't use that mantra, and I don't get too caught up in those things. So follow your heart or ask someone else who's more interested in mantras like that. Number 5. Can lower samadhi be present from time to time, like a small thought, not disturbing, just passing by, like an insignificant small cloud, which I, the awareness, become awareness of my field of consciousness? Yes, lower samadhis happen all the time. You're not aware of them because there's no content there, and you're not paying attention. Remember, what you're doing is, what most people are doing, is they are living their life in such a way that they're looking for things. This is here, this is not here. I feel this, I don't feel this. I think this, I don't think that. So you see what are they doing there? They're essentially defining themselves by the things that come in and go out of their life. But as a yogi, with that subtle awareness, you're letting go of that attachment, and you are learning to be aware of that presence which recognizes what comes in and goes out. So the more that you naturally become identified with that eternal timeless presence, then you recognize these lower samadhis, because you recognize, oh wait, there is no content here. There is stillness. Whereas the person who is attached to the mind and things coming in and going out all the time, they'll never recognize it. They'll never see it until they start to have it pointed out to them through some sort of meditation or spiritual practice, usually. Another question, how long should the Om technique be done? Is there a minimum amount of time? Whatever you can do. And again, the idea of setting a time for meditation is simply to develop your capacity for discipline so that you actually do it. So when you're a beginner and your teacher says meditate for 20 minutes every day, or you get better and your meditation teacher says meditate for an hour every day, or 42 minutes or 48 minutes every day, it's not because that amount of time is that there's something magical about that amount of time. It's because in the beginning, someone needs to tell you, sit down for 20 minutes so that you learn how to do that. In time, as you get better at it, the time doesn't matter. You could sit down for 20 minutes, and if you're an advanced meditator, you could get the benefits of sitting for 3 hours compared to someone who's just trying to get started. And you also find that as you get better at meditation, you naturally sit longer. Just like when you learn to play a musical instrument. At first, your fingers hurt, you don't know what you're doing, you can barely do it for 15 minutes. But once you get good at it, and you're acquainted with it, and you know how the process works, some musicians can sit for hours on end, just playing, just so absorbed in it. And that's ideally what happens with a meditator, is they get good at it. They develop the skill, they know how it works, they understand the subtle aspects of it, and then they just enjoy it, just like a musician enjoys sitting with their musical instrument for hours on end. So the time is not about anything other at first than just simply discipline. Otherwise, with the Om vibration, do it for as long as you can comfortably with interest. With interest. And if you can't do it very long with interest, well then, again, set a time, 10 minutes, 15 minutes to force yourself to do it. And eventually, the interest will develop such that you can go longer. So verse 39 of the Yoga Sutras, can the chosen object be a word or a sentence? Yes, it can be anything you want. It's your chosen object. In fact, last time I met with Mr. Davis, we discussed just that meditation is about choosing something and focusing on it. That the mechanics of the process are not the magic in a word or the magic in a pranayama. It is, are you able to focus on one thing and hold your awareness there? But to the immature mind who's just getting involved in meditation, yoga practice, it needs to be, coated in sugar. Oh, this is a magical thing you're going to do. And people say, ooh, I love magic. And it's like, I'm going to do it then. Rather than just focus on something and you'll get it. No, that's not very magical. That's boring. All right, so we'll keep going. We have still more questions from the email. Don't hesitate to ask your questions in the chat box, and I will get back to that. Okay, so verses 33 to 37 in the Yoga Sutras. Are these verses related only when one sits in meditation or also to be practiced during the day? They're to be practiced anytime that you can, anytime that you're aware of it. Remember, meditation is an intensive practice. It's like exercising, it's like training. An athlete who is a runner or who plays basketball, they lift weights and they run so that they can do their sport well. Meditation is like that. Meditation is like that intensive training that an athlete does such that they can do their sport well. And your sport is living your life well. So to answer that question, you do it at any time that you can, that you are aware that it is beneficial. So verse 39. This deals with, should I look one's object of contemplation? Should I look with open eyes or see the object with eyes closed as visualization? I tried both, but after a while my eyes burned, which is distracting. Maybe in the beginning one can look at the object, and when stable one sees it with a spiritual eye. It doesn't matter. Some people can sit perfectly with their eyes open and gaze at an object and it's not distracting for them. Some people need to close their eyes. Some people even go so far as to have to put a blindfold over their eyes. Some people have to, in the beginning, just simply meditate in the darkest room possible. So in this situation, it doesn't matter. You have to do what works for you. If keeping your eyes open is distracting, then don't do that. In numerous Advaitic texts, they say that Ishvara is on Vyavahirika level as the creator of the world of transaction. Only Brahma is Paramatika. Is Ishvara on Vyavaharika? How can he then be above time and space? No idea. As you know, I'm not interested in those types of things. My mind doesn't enjoy that anymore. So I wouldn't worry about it. Just meditate on your chosen object, still your mind, be quiet and see what happens. Or, as I said before, who wants to know? Who wants to know if Ishvara is on Vyavaharika? Who wants to know that? Figure that out. Who is that I that wants to know that? That is the important thing. We don't want to waste time anymore with more mental concepts or games, remember. Okay, so some other questions. I've been regularly doing meditation for the past few months and now starting to see positive changes in my anger control. But I should also tell you that throughout the day, there is constant in the back of my mind thoughts about whether my meditation is going well or not, like fearing for an exam. The days when meditation session goes well, I am happy, and otherwise, the waiting and anxiety continues for the next session outcome. How should I prepare myself not to fear about daily meditation sessions, experience level or outcome? I have no idea. It's not something that I've experienced. I can think of other things in life that have caused me anxiety and fear, and the best way I got through that was just not to think about it. I would recommend setting a timer or an alarm clock for when you're supposed to meditate. And then when that alarm goes off, you go and you meditate. You meditate for a set amount of time. And then when that's done, just get up and go about your life. Don't worry about it anymore. Don't think about it. That alarm is the thing that's keeping track of it for you. It doesn't help to think about meditation when you're not meditating. It helps. Remember, the whole purpose is to do what you're doing when you're doing it. It may be that you have some other anxiety issues that need to be worked out. You have to find a way to work those out. Yoga practice and meditation might not be the answer. Maybe talking to, again, a counselor. Why do you have that kind of anxiety about something as simple as meditation? Who knows? But you need to work it out in that regard. Otherwise, just simply set a specific time to meditate. Go do it. When you're done, be done, move on. In my life, there were certain work responsibilities that I didn't like. I didn't want to do it. It wasn't necessarily anxiety about it, but I definitely had some negative thoughts about it. And the only way I found to deal with that was to simply decide, okay, on every day or once a week, on this day, for this amount of time, I'm going to do that procedure. I didn't think about it before. I didn't think about it after. But as soon as my phone came up and said, now it's time to do this, I didn't question it. I got up, I went, sat down, started doing it. I found that 2 or 3 hours later, I got a lot done. And I eventually lost my negative connotation around it. So just keep doing it, and eventually that should resolve itself, assuming it's not some other kind of psychological complex that needs to be worked out in another way. So a couple weeks back, I asked you how to evaluate the meditation session, and I shared a TED Talk, which I did. And I believe we talked about this last time, maybe, where in the TED Talk there was a discussion of a meditation teacher who had a student who didn't feel like they were making much progress. They didn't quite get it, how it was supposed to work, because they weren't on cloud nine all the time. They weren't having fantastic experiences. But then one day, this woman was out to dinner with her spouse, and they got in a little bit of an argument. And the spouse looked at her after the argument. He said, you should keep up that meditation. And she was like, why? And he said, because 9 months ago, if we had had this argument, you would have got up out of the restaurant and just left. And so he was saying that you can see that the meditation is working because the person has become less reactive. And I've heard this over and over again, and you will find it to be the case with you as well. So whether meditation is working or not is typically very subtle, and it kind of pours over into your regular everyday life in ways such as that. But then the rest of the question here, at the same time, I am longing to see the colors or Om sound in my meditation. What should I do to see colors or visions in my meditation? And I know from your previous Q&A sessions that this doesn't matter. So you're right, it doesn't. But totally for self-motivation, I believe this can help me. In a way, maybe it can help you, but I also think that that is an excuse for focusing on what is the real point of meditation. It's like saying, I want to be in a relationship so that I can have sex all the time. Well, that's not what a relationship is all about. Being able to enjoy intercourse with a partner is kind of a side benefit to the whole thing. So you're right. It's not important. And I personally don't like the idea of people having visions in meditation, because usually most of the time, 98% of the time, it's just fantasy and it's just distracting. What I would recommend you doing is going back and reviewing the Kriya Yoga 11-hour training course where I discussed how to experience the Om vibration. I recommend going to youtube.com/Kriya Yoga Online and going to that particular page and searching specifically for Om technique or something of that nature. And I'll bring up videos where I discuss how to go into the Om vibration, how to see the inner light and hear the inner sound. But again, in order to do that, you have to meditate well first. Some people, whether they've got tinnitus or hyperactive visual part of their brain, they can naturally, this just kind of happens for them. That's not the case for most people. For most people, you actually learn to hear the Om vibration and see that inner light by meditating well, because the reason that individuals, this is my theory anyway, having studied many near-death experiences and the idea of them seeing light and research into similar things that create that experience. When a person dies, obviously their body is going to completely relax. Everything relaxes in the sense of the nervous energy is no longer focused in certain ways. And then they're able to see this inner light and proceed to this inner light. Certain other experiences, when a person is in deep relaxation, like in flotation tanks, they're able to see the light and hear the sound. Why? Because the body is perfectly relaxed, but they're awake and watchful. That's what the meditator is learning to do consciously without having to die or be in a deprivation tank or to be on some kind of crazy drugs. They're learning to stay upright and aware, let everything relax, listen, and watch through the spiritual eye. Then they hear the Om vibration. Then the inner light shows up. So right now, the best thing you can do to have an authentic experience of the inner light and the Om vibration, not a fantasy, not a color, not a visualization that's probably not real, is to practice relaxing while staying awake. That may be something that you do simply with meditation. It may be something that you work on outside of meditation, such as getting a massage once a week, such as doing hatha yoga, gentle hatha yoga 3 times a week, doing things that naturally, automatically teach the body to relax, walking in nature, observing, walking through the woods. And that's why your life is meant, that's why it is advised to have a simple life. Because if you're not addicted to Facebook, if you're not addicted to TV, if you're not overstimulated by caffeine and alcohol and sex and too much food, the less you are overstimulated, the easier it is to simply relax and stay awake and watchful. And the easier you are able to stay awake yet relaxed, the easier it becomes to hear the Om vibration. The easier it becomes to see the inner light. But that has to happen first. Otherwise, anything else that occurs is probably just a passing fantasy. So I realize that you need that for self-motivation, but that's chasing the wrong thing. That's like saying, I want to practice Kriya Yoga to have special powers, to be immortal, to do what the yogis do in Autobiography of a Yogi. And that's missing the boat. It's completely, it's not going to work in the long term. So the best thing you can do is focus on relaxing while staying alert and awake, and doing that consistently for months and years on end. Okay, I think that brings us to the end. Yes, that brings us to the end of the emailed questions. Very good. So let's go ahead and get back to the group chat questions here. Okay, so there's a question here. Why is this focus important in the big picture? What would be the result for consciousness? Since I've talked about a lot since you posted this, I'm not quite sure which part you're talking about. So if you can retype that question with some specifics on what you're referring to, and then I'll speak to it. Does a repetitive song stuck in the mind during meditation equate to an obsessive thought that should just be ignored? Yes. In addition to the regular meditation, if we want to heal any of the chakras specifically, can we continue with healing that chakra? Do you think that helps, or is it not necessary? I have an issue with throat chakra, expressing myself freely, and the physical manifestation of it as well. Well, as I've mentioned before, chanting through the chakras does this for you. It is one of the best meditation techniques for this purpose, because it balances all of the chakras. And it's okay, I understand why you want to focus on one chakra, because that's where your awareness feels the problem. But if you balance all the chakras, they balance each other, they heal each other. So by doing chanting through the chakras, what this does is it brings awareness to each chakra. And as you bring awareness to each chakra, whether it comes to you as a realization of healing or not, over time, just like meditation works, it becomes a little more in balance. And then the chakra above it becomes a little more in balance. And the chakra below and above it becomes a little more in balance. And it keeps going in this fashion until eventually that chakra system is well tuned and well honed. And so it becomes easier to have health within the areas of the chakras. So chanting through the chakras is one way to do it, but you don't have to have the specific intention for healing. That is what will happen naturally. As far as working on the issues with expressing yourself freely and maybe physical manifestations of the chakras, do practical things to help that. That's what's going to make it, that's what's going to speed up the process. When you're aware of something like not being able to express yourself freely, find out why you can't express yourself freely. Don't worry about the chakra. Do chanting through the chakras, that'll take care of that part of it. But then start speaking up for yourself. Start practicing speaking freely. Go join a group for public speaking. Find out what psychological issues are getting in your way and get someone to help you resolve that. That is what is going to make the most influential difference rather than just saying, well, I'm just going to chant through the chakras and see what happens. Always keep that in mind, that the things that you attribute to a chakra deficiency or something needing to be healed within a chakra, yes, chanting through the chakras and bringing awareness to the chakras help, but then you also have to act in a way as if that chakra was healthy. You have to practice it, even if you fail, because that is creating a new pattern. Just like, again, if we think someone who wants to practice a sport, if they need to throw a ball a particular distance and they've never done it before, and they throw that ball and they're terrible at it, well, how are they going to build up that blueprint of throwing that ball well? They just pick up a ball and they keep throwing it, and they keep throwing it, and they keep aiming, and they keep focusing, and they keep doing it. And eventually, as time goes on, something happens in the body and the mind through the intention that they get really good at it. You know, I used to like playing darts. People can tell me all day long how to hold the dart, you know, just how to throw it, you know, with the release. But them telling me doesn't actually make my body or my arm or my consciousness know how it works. I have to throw the dart, see what happens. Okay, I'll try it a little bit differently. Throw the dart, pay attention to what happens. Try it a little bit differently. Eventually, you can hit what you want to hit. So the same is going to be true for this idea of the chakra. Find out what is the issue, and then find a self-help book, talk to someone, try, fail, get up and try again and fail. You know, trying to speak your truth, for example, that's hard if you've never done it before. It's difficult. If you've ever had that experience where you're a people pleaser and just words come out of your mouth, you're like, geez, I didn't mean to say that. And that's part of your life pattern. You've been doing that for 40 years. Well, what's the first step to help heal that? The pattern happens. Someone comes along and they talk you into doing something you want. You just agree because you're a people pleaser and you don't want to express yourself freely. But you know you're working on that. So you stop. You say, wait a minute. You talk to the person, say, you know, I know what I just said, but I got to tell you, I didn't really mean that. This is my truth. And then, of course, they try to talk you out of it, and maybe they do. And you're like, man, they got me again. But next time, you come with more energy. And you do the same thing. You say, no, I really don't want to do that. And they try to talk to you and you say, no, I don't want to do that. And eventually you become so comfortable expressing yourself in that way that from the very beginning, there's no question about it. You just naturally do it. That's what you're going to find to be the most helpful and beneficial for you as you work through whatever you consider your chakra issues to be. How can we extend our moments of being content with what is immediately present? How can we extend our moments of being content with what is immediately present? Learn to be content with not being content. Because there will be moments throughout everyone's life who is embodied where there will be discontent. And think about it. If you can be all right with the fact that you're not content, then you're content. It's just like when I first learned about dealing with things like depression. That was something that I had dealt with when I was younger. And one of the most powerful moments of realization around that was when I realized, oh, I'm depressed. Hey, that's okay. And when that occurred, what would typically have been, a week of depression turned into just an afternoon or just a day. Because I wasn't fighting it, I was like, well, this is just what life is right now. So that's the best answer I can give there. Okay. Why is focused attention important? I feel that this is the key to be content. Interesting. Is that so? Focused attention is important because think about it this way. Think about the person, and this is an extreme example, but it'll help you understand. Think about the person that who's never been to a big city before. And they walk into a big city, and all of a sudden, the lights are flashing, people are going by, they're bumping into them, there's car horns blaring, they're overwhelmed. That is like an individual, that's like 95% of the people in the world who are going through life and they're just bombarded with This is happening. This is happening. That person's talking. They're scattered. And that's why most people never accomplish anything, and most people never get anything done that they want to. But now imagine a person who knows how to focus. They know how to ignore the honking horns. They know how to ignore the people pushing past them. They know they want to get to that Chinese buffet because they're hungry. So they just lock on the Chinese buffet. They don't take any side trips. They get where they want to go, and then they experience what they want, which is some wonderful lo mein or whatever it might be. And in a way, the reason that focus is so important is because whatever you want to experience requires your focus and attention. So if people say, I want to experience peace, or I want to experience God, or I want to experience love, or whatever your reason is that you want to experience something in life, if you've trained yourself to focus, then that means now when you sit down in meditation, or even in life in general, you can hold your awareness on that which you want to know until you have the realization of it. Just like the individual I talked about who wants to walk through downtown Las Vegas and get to the Chinese buffet. It might take him 20 minutes, but if he gets distracted, he's not going to make it. So the same thing, if you want to know what God is, if you want to know what yourself is, if you want to know what peace is, then focus is so important, because you have to be able to hold your awareness on that contemplation until you get there. So the focus is like the ability to say, this is where I want to go, this is what I want to experience. And by holding your awareness on it, that's why in the Yoga Sutras, we have internalization of intention, then we have focus on an object, then we have holding our awareness on that object, and the final limb of yoga is samadhi, which is oneness, direct experience of that object. So focus is so important because it allows you to experience the clarity of your consciousness, because it trains, it gives you the mechanism or the skill or the tool to hold your awareness such that you realize that truth of your being. So that's why focus is so important. And that's why people who meditate tend to be more successful in life. And I don't mean success as in making millions of dollars or having the perfect spouse. I mean, they're just more, what they do better. They do well because they've got that focus. And that's why when people come to meditation who are successful business people, or who are successful athletes, or who are successful in anything, they're usually better at meditation because they already know how to focus. They already know. They already get it. And if you want to be content, the only way that you get to be content is by practicing being content. It's not about, I will be content when this occurs. I will be content when I control this situation. That is a waste of time, and that will drive you mad in the end. You develop contentment by practicing contentment in all circumstances. And that requires the ability to focus on contentment for that to occur. Okay, this is a good question. I need some. Okay, so there's one question that I want to remember, but the one that just popped up is related to what we've been discussing. Is it okay if we prefer solitude and less interactions, social life? I'm a little confused on this concept when we say it should not matter how many distractions we have, people you have to interact with, as we should learn to keep our attention within no matter what situation. But then how can I focus within if I'm still affected by those interactions? Yes, there is a point in time in everyone's development, at least from my experience, where you learn to get stronger. When I first got involved in meditation, I had to be very diligent about who I spent time with, what I did for entertainment, what music I listened to. And you've heard me talk about this before. Being a musician, music is a very important part of my life. And for the first 5 years of my experience with Kriya Yoga and meditation practice, I cut out all of my favorite music. I didn't listen to anything. And that was hard, but that was because I was easily distracted by those things. In the very first years, I cut out a lot of social interaction. I didn't want to be around anybody. And I thought that was the way to go because, yogis talk about solitude and these sorts of things. But just as with all things, eventually I got strong enough to where I can listen to anything I want now. I can play any music I want. I can turn on the radio. I can listen to my favorite music. And when I sit to meditate, it's not an earworm driving me crazy like it would have before, because I have the ability to focus on what I want to experience. If I want to focus on music, that's what I do. If I want to focus on meditating, that's what I'm doing. Music is no longer there. When it comes to being around people, I still personally do prefer solitude. I'd rather be out in nature than in a bustling place. But now I can be in large groups. I can deal with people. I can talk to people all day long, and it doesn't bother me. But that was because I had to go through a period of learning to internalize my awareness such that I was able to go back and experience life from that internal vantage point. And that's why the monastic idea is kind of a good idea, but really for most people it should be a temporary training, which is why most people need to go away to retreats, but they're not meant to stay in retreat. And everyone has a different path in life. Some people are meant to be alone all the time. And if they are, that will naturally occur. That will naturally happen. Some people have to deal with family. Some people have to deal with work experiences. If that is prominent in your life, then that is why meditation and taking time to get away and go on retreats from every now and then is so important, because it gives you the skill, the ability to remain internalized while you go into the world. So that's just a balance that you learn. You have to watch, okay, I need some time alone so I can recuperate. But then on the other end of that, you also need to have, but now I realize that I am strong enough that I can go back into the world and interact appropriately a little longer. And so you go away, you get stronger. You come in, you practice your strength until eventually, whether you're in a busy place or whether you're off in the woods, that internal state is still the same. So how you work that out is probably going to be a personal matter. Okay, so here's the other question. If one is focused on fixing things or digging into problems, is it a lesson in having to give up control because there's always something to fix? I struggle sometimes with focusing on what is wrong, and I don't get a sense of satisfaction until I can fix it. I enjoy organizing, for instance, but I notice I can get so possessive of my vision until I complete it. It distracts me when I meditate sometimes until I can finish it. I've been trying to work on letting my attachment to it go. Again, these questions that you're asking, they're very good questions, and it's good that we're talking about them because they require balance. And most of the time, people want to go to extremes. Like, I'm just going to be away from people, or no, I have to learn to be with people all the time in order to have my strength, when it's really a little of both. In this situation, again, it comes into the idea of surrender and willpower. There are certain things that you can take care of. There are certain things you cannot take care of. So the issue is learning the difference between the two. If you are obsessed about fixing things because you need to have that sense of control, then in time you either learn to let that go, or I can assure you time will take it away from you one way or another, even if it's not immediate. So it's that idea of learning what can you do. Like, for example, and this is probably not applicable to you, but there are people who, for some reason, can't get out of bed and get to work on time, and they wonder why they can't keep a job. It's simple. Set your alarm clock, or 3 alarm clocks if you have to, so that you get your butt out of bed, even if you don't want to, and you get to your job. That's something that can be controlled. That's something that's easily controlled for effective people. There are other things which cannot be controlled. And the trick is learning to recognize what those are. And some things require a lot of contemplation or experience to understand that, or just life experience. For example, I've made the joke often, that for the first 36 years of my life, I thought, yoga and Kriya Yoga was great. You just do it. You follow your Ayurvedic lifestyle. You study the sutras. You be a good person, and nothing's going to go wrong. Everything's going to be great. Then eventually time comes along and teaches you that sometimes no matter how well you eat or exercise or how well you plan things, sometimes some DNA goes wonky. And then whatever that experience is in your particular life path, you learn to walk it. Or maybe something crazy happens, like your house explodes off of a hill, not because you did anything, but by the property. So that is a question that I have found that, yes, if you are constantly trying to fix things, there may be an obsession about control there. But if there are things that just make sense, if people are coming over for dinner and there's a problem that you don't have any eggs to make your meatloaf or whatever it might be, well, then that's something to go take care of, because it's an easy, obvious thing. I'm not sure I fully answered that question or answered it in a way that was helpful, but I do find people typically who are always looking for problems, or people who are always looking for that next little bit of karma to take care of, they're usually just addicted to control. Because you don't get rid of karma by always looking for your karma and digging into your karma. You get rid of your karma by rising above it. And those are just words I'm using. You're not literally rising above anything. You are, in a sense, seeing it for what it is. Karma is the rise and fall of life. So if you know that you are not the rise and fall of life, then karma ceases to affect you. And that is what meditation practice does. Okay, so we're getting near the end of our time together. So if I've answered your question, wonderful. If there's more that you would like me to speak to, don't hesitate to post the question. So what we'll do, same thing we did in the beginning. Do you have any more questions? If it's no, simply type no. If yes, type yes, and then I'll wait for your follow-up. Okay, great. So in closing, you keep in mind that we all have our unique life path as a body, as a personality, working through a mind. And you're part of this whole process of this lineage of enlightenment is to learn to live your life the best way you can with the people that are around you, with the work that you're doing, with the situations that you're in, with the current state of your body, whether it's good or bad, however you want to understand it, and realize that this whole experience of life is like a play or a drama in a way, and that you are the actors or the actresses. And that what you're doing with your meditation practice is learning to become aware of that. Learning to become aware that you are not this body. That I don't know how, and I can't explain it to you with words, but that essence of you, which is functioning through this body, remains when the body is done. This essence existed before this body was even formed. And sometimes I have found that when contemplating certain things, if I don't get an answer to a question, it's because maybe it's not the right question, or maybe because it's not accurate or appropriate. For example, having lost Melissa last spring, someone who'd been in my life since I was 16, and then having lost Roy physically on Wednesday, when I didn't expect him to go so soon, when we just talked 4 weeks ago, I'd contemplated a lot of death and loss. And I would contemplate on what is it, what is this? Like what is death? And oddly enough, no response ever came really to that question. And from previous contemplative processes, what happened was I realized, well, maybe there isn't a death. Maybe there is no death. Maybe that's why there has been no response to this question that I've had for an intensive amount of time. And I think that there's an internal resonance there about that. There is the loss of a body. There is the body stops functioning. But that is not death. That is just the body stopping functioning. Just like there was life before this body existed. So that is why when yogis, and hopefully you don't spend a lot of time on YouTube doing this, but when people start talking about, yoga making you immortal, yoga doesn't make you immortal. Yoga reveals your immortality, which is that essence which persists through all things. And with yoga and meditation practice, we're not trying to see colors, we're not trying to see lights, we're not trying to hear the sounds of harps in our ear. Those are good stages to help get us along. What we're aiming to do is to be aware and embody and be that eternal essence, which is simple, which is there whether you realize it or not. We're just aiming to realize it. That's why when you look at people, for example, having flown out to Nevada, I spent a lot of time in big cities, spent a lot of time in an airport. You see a lot of people walking by. You see a lot of people doing their thing. And you if you've ever done that, you watch and think, wow, these people's lives are just walking around, listening to music, or doing these things, which is easy to get judgmental about. And it's like, wow, how worthless is that? And that's what I would have done when I was younger. But as you start to realize that the eternal essence, which is you, is present in all beings, you no longer have that judgment. You see that consciousness is expressing in all of these people, no matter what they're doing, whether their kids throwing a fit on the floor and they're like trying to drag them through the airport because they don't know anything better to do, or whether the person's sitting peacefully over there reading the newspaper, or someone sweeping the floor, or whatever it might be. You lose the judgment of, they're not doing anything spiritual. And you become aware of the fact that no, spirit is experiencing that through that life, that body. So that's why for your own lives, it's not about the content of your life, as in, are you doing the thing that is defined as spiritual? Are you portraying that? If I saw you in an airport, would I see you with mala beads meditating as you wait for your plane? When would I say, that's a spiritual person? Or would I just see you going about your daily life, but internally you are aware that you are this essence that is the same essence in all beings, living through this temporary form. And that is just as spiritual as anything else. One of the things Mr. Davis and I talked about last time I saw him was again about death, and he had mentioned something about an idea or a theory that we are here now in this physical form, but when the physical form dies, we are just simply absorbed back into the Om, back into the self, back into the infinite. That's it. And that has made a lot of sense to me in my own contemplations. It doesn't make sense when you start pulling in the theory of reincarnation and all these other things, but that theory of reincarnation, that's a mental construct. That's just to give someone, just like any religion, that's just to give someone peace of mind who can't quite grasp or allow themselves to experience the eternal essence of themselves. Because if they can say, oh, okay, well, I'll be reborn again, or I'll go to heaven, or I'll have this thing, well, that tranquilizes their mind immediately, because they know that there is an eternal somehow, but not necessarily the eternal of the way it actually is. And that's what we find as we practice yoga and meditation, is that the eternal, or the things that we're aiming to realize, we start with mental concepts that get us going in that direction. But as we grow and mature and live through life and meditate, then we start to see how it actually is, like what it's really like. So in the beginning, okay, I'm going to reincarnate 1,000 times and then I'll finally be enlightened. You think that for the first 5 years. But then as you start meditating, you start having these realizations about the eternal essence of life. You start thinking, is that really how it works? And then you outgrow that until you have your own direct experience of it. So everything that you do through your life, through your meditation, the point is to have your own direct experience of what this essence of being is doing, living through your body, mind, and personality right now. Once you get that, then you become aware of the eternal aspect of it. And while you will still cry when people die or leave you, you will still get angry when things don't go your way, because that's the natural part of your personality. You won't be addicted to it. It'll pass through you, which means that when it comes to time to change into a new form or to release attachment to things which no longer serve you, be it a physical body, an old relationship, a job, an old habit, it's easier for you to do that because you know you are not defined by those things. So in the end, this is why we're doing what we're doing. We're not doing it to act or be like one of our spiritual heroes. We're not doing it to act or be like people who want to be a spiritual savior of the world. We're doing it for this clarity, for this realization of what is true, always, beyond name and form. So keep that in mind as you practice, and realize that as we proceed from this point forward, after Mr. Davis's passing, it really solidified how important this work is for us now, because we are the ones that are here doing it. And by your participation in meditating, listening to these talks, you are also part of this lineage of enlightenment. And that's what it's all about. Because one day I won't be here, one day you won't be here, but the effect of your life, the effect of your meditation will proceed through, I don't know how, but it'll proceed through future generations. And that's the most important thing, is realizing our oneness, our connection through time and through space, not being addicted to or attached to the physical, which is in constant change, in constant flux. So I'd like to recommend that maybe for the next half hour or so, or hour on your own, spend some time meditating. I'm going to go get a bite to eat downstairs here in a minute, and I'm also going to do the same. So I will see you in meditation. Personally, I'll start in about 15 minutes. So if you want to join in then, that's fine. So take care.